Hello and welcome to the Coaching Podcast, coaching for success in sport and business. Your host is Emma Doyle, the energy and high performance under pressure coach who is a world leader in unleashing human potential. Buckle up for this high octane session. Let them have it, coach.
G'day everybody and welcome to the Coaching Podcast. My name's Emma Doyle and I have the pleasure today of introducing and interviewing Chris Kachel. I've known Chris now for many, many years and I've jumped at the opportunity to interview him. So Chris, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Emma. Very good. Yeah. Good to see you.
You too. All right. Well, the first question is a bit of a pattern break question. It is called the Vegemite question. You either love it or you hate it, and you're an Aussie coach. What's your take?
Yeah, no, I love it. And I've taken a jar of Vegemite on a number of overseas tours and people think you're crazy. They hate it, but we as Aussies absolutely love it. Yeah.
Could you share with us a coaching moment that went really, really well?
Yeah. All right, there's probably a couple, but the one that sticks in mind is being head coach of the AIS for 12 years. It was sort of a developmental program, athletes coming in anywhere between 1 and 2 years, age 15 to 18. And one particular player, a female player, again, it was always a democratic process that you had to apply to come into the AIS. But this particular one, we tapped on the shoulder to see whether she wanted to come into the AIS. And my theme around that was the planning. I'd put together and met with her parents, and I had a 12-month plan already set out with the second half of the year to look at playing in Japan, a number of 10,000 events, and finishing with a 25,000 event in Saga on natural grass, which I thought would have been a great take for this particular player. So to cut a long story short, the player comes into the program ranked WTA probably 660 and doesn't have a great European tour, worked really hard, super hard over a period before going to Japan. The 410s, and I've always liked to take the young girls to Japan because the way the Japanese play, you've got to play with a point of difference and play with variety. So it was always a great learning curve, get them up there to beat the Japanese players. So this particular player won the first 10, won the second 10, won the third 10, won the fourth 10. So won 4 tournaments in a row. And the last tournament goes to a 25 on natural grass. So we're going from hard to grass. And you're thinking, well, the run's got to finish at some stage. And another Australian player goes the opposite way with our Fed Cup captain and goes to the US Open and also comes to Saga for the 25. And these two players play off in the 25. The player is 0 and 6 and put a game plan together and executes the game plan to a T and wins that particular tournament. So wins five tournaments in a row, which a lot of people think, how can you do that? But I guess the lesson was, from a coaching perspective, one is the planning of trying to, be meticulous with your planning of what you're trying to do. But when you're playing so many matches, the recovery component, it was so important to keep the player up. And also, every time we had an opportunity to have a day off, we went sightseeing. So just to get the blend of tennis, life, the whole lot, different culture, different country. So that was, one of my best coaching moments. And that particular player ended up number 8 in the world.
Ooh,
so
I like
in 12 months at the AIS, come in and, as I said, about 660, went out after 12 months at about 132. And ended up number 8 in the world. And that probably tells you who it is, but I won't mention it.
Yeah, that's a great story. I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Planning, recovery, balance, the whole scenario there to keep a player up for that many weeks. Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that recovery. It's not just the body. So important, the mindset recovery as well. Fantastic. What about on the flip side, Chris? Could you share with us a coaching moment that didn't go so well and what might be a lesson or two?
Look, I'm always a positive person, and I've always said a negative has never won anything. So regardless of the situation, you've got to try and find a positive. But one thing as a coach that really got up my nose was lack of effort, both on the training court and on the match court. And again, when we get to the sliding doors moment, you'll see how I was brought up that really annoys me. And a female player messed up an entry. We had to go, instead of going to a grass court swing, we ended up going to a hard court swing and had to travel long distances or whatever. Had to change the plan around everything and got to that particular tournament. The lead up was okay, but went out in a first match and tanked. And I was furious, absolutely furious. So that's probably my worst coaching moment. So, you train so hard to perform on court, and then when someone lack of effort, as I said, that really gets up my nose. I don't think there's any excuse for that. When you walk out on court, you might be carrying some niggling little injuries and whatever, but 100% plus is the requirement. And then if you lose, so be it. Right? You gave it your best shot. But when it's lack of effort, you've got to have a really good look deep inside yourself of why.
Fantastic. And I think I might ask you a few more questions around how we motivate the next generation of today at the end of our official questions. I'd love to get your take on that, a little deeper dive. But all right, well, let's jump into the sliding doors question. You know it, so take it away.
I guess these sliding door moments, the storytelling side of it, you get an understanding of myself as a player, as a coach, as a person. And the first one, I was a 15-year-old from country New South Wales, northwest New South Wales, Tamworth, and moved to Sydney as a 15-year-old. And I guess mentoring back then wasn't a factor, but when I look back, my mentor was Ken Rosewall, and you couldn't get a better mentor. And I would practice with Ken, and the scenario was, Chris, training is like war, not against me, but against the ball. And if you don't put in, nick off. Don't waste my time. So, go back to the 100%. So basically, if you don't give 100%, you actually regress. So we'd go and play 5 sets. I tried to model my backhand. Rosewall had the best slice backhand at the time. So we're talking in the 70s. Actually, Mark Kovacs used it the last year as the Ken Rosewall drive slice backhand. And I've been big on that here in Australia, again, developing the slice backhand as a point of difference. But we also talked about, well, there were many things, but a couple that stood out were the spirit and the integrity of the game, that the player is not bigger than the game. And I think that was something special. So, again, those training sessions, you go and play 5 sets, and it was just hammer and tong. And, as a 15, turning 16-year-old, that sort of set me on the path of what I wanted to do with effort going forward to play, coach, etc.
That's awesome. Yeah, Ken Rosewall, one of a kind, hey?
Yes, a special person. Yeah. And just a legend. And even now, so down to earth. I see him at functions and we have a chat. And he's well into his 80s and just a great man, a legend of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. I didn't know Tamworth. I didn't know that.
Yeah, Tamworth. Yeah,
every day.
Yeah.
I love that about the podcast.
Other sliding doors moment, I was the first Orange boy to be selected for Davis Cup. So as a 17, 18-year-old, I went to Pakistan and India with the Davis Cup team. And back in the 70s, it was pretty tough. It was under Neale Fraser as the captain. But what stood out there in very tough conditions, so they win the tie in Pakistan, they go to India. And the crowd is just an enormous crowd, yelling and screaming. But the commitment of the players leading up to want to represent their country was just outstanding. So, a few days out, it was all hard work, 2-on-1 drills, etc. But then closer, the taper was always match play. And reputations meant nothing. It was who was playing best at the time. And as I said, to see the commitment of the players to want to represent their country was something special. And just a side note to that, just again, crossing the border from Pakistan to India was quite an experience as I said, 17, 18-year-old. Obviously, there was friction between Pakistan and India back then. We had to cross so here's, try and picture this, the Australian Davis Cup team crossing the border with our suitcase on our head with machine guns on both sides of the border, crossing into India.
Oh,
so
wow.
yeah. So what an experience. So
wow.
yeah, exactly. And then to see the
Building
tie,
resilience, isn't it, already?
yeah, exactly. So commitment, resilience, whatever.
Yeah.
And again, a number of the players were sick, but they were up and about trying to represent their country. So yeah, and again, Davis Cup now, it's so sad for us as Australians to see what's happening with Davis Cup. If you look up that 1974 tie, it will go down in history as the longest tie in the number of games that were played. There's 17, 15, 18, 16 sets, 12, 10. I think the doubles rubber was 99 games.
Oh, wow.
And I sat courtside for every point of that particular tie. So, your learning curve is pretty steep when you're there to see what goes on. So that was a sliding door, Davis Cup. Another one was, and again, I guess this shaped me as a coach a little bit. Richard Schonbron was the chief German coach back in the day when Becker and Graf were at their peak. And I think it was about 1995. He wrote a paper after interviewing all the top players of the day, and it was called Common Characteristics of Champions. And it was sort of my Bible that I used. And there were 14 points to it. And on those 14 points, there was only about 4 that related to hitting a tennis ball. So it was all around fighting spirit, dedication to hard work in training, high resistance to stress, maximum concentration capacity, economy in movements, excellent perception and anticipation, and the high resilience to injuries. And that was, as I said, that was my Bible then going forward. And I used to get the players that come into the AIS and rate themselves on those 14 components. And it was very interesting to see what would come out of that. So that was, and also from that, his charting was all about series of points, and which related to momentum. And again, a series of points with 3 or more, and the more series of points you can win, the greater opportunity that you've got to win a match. So that was his charting, and to me that was very important. And to take that even further, when Talent ID sort of came into play, there were all the field tests and whatever, and I used to go around and observe a lot of matches and training and whatever. And Dick Telford at the AIS, he, we talked about all the field testing, but he said the coach's eye is very important as well. It's what you pick up. So I was thinking, well, I need to have something when I go around these quick observations, what for me works. So I put this thing in place. I called it 2 bounces and love 40. So again, the 2 bounces, if I saw in a warm-up or a match that an athlete let the ball bounce twice, I'd put an X. If in match play or in a match at love 40, they rolled over and didn't try, that was an X. So it was a very simple formula to try and work out the profile of an athlete. So go back to the series of points. Every point you've got to be like the bee at the honey pot. At love 40, if you roll over, so a series of points now goes to 4. So the momentum continues. So that was something that was really important to my coaching, and those 14 points. Another one, the most dynamic speaker that I've ever sat through was Bryce Courtney, the author of Power of One. Now, he spoke at the AIS Theaterette in Canberra. I forget what year it was. It was before the Olympics, and he had everyone on the edge of their seat. And this was from the young Jimmies, 10, 11, 12 to staff of 60, 70 years of age. Everyone was just engrossed in his speech. But the thing that stood out to me was that he mentioned that someone has to be an accountant, someone has to be a doctor, someone has to be a champion, someone has to be an Olympic gold medalist. It may as well be you. And that's resonated with me for a long time through, obviously, my coaching, And with coaching, one thing that I say to a lot of coaches, never be afraid to lose your job. Never be looking over your shoulder. If you have the knowledge and the expertise, don't play a straight bat. Be innovative in going forward, but don't ever be afraid to lose your job.
Fantastic. Oh, my goodness. Fantastic. I love that. I was speaking to Piotr, from my good friend from Poland, the other day, who brought up Richard Schonbron, and it's like his name's come up. I haven't heard his name for years, and it's come up within the last week. And you reminded me about what a pivotal place that he played in my formative sort of, especially those all those activities around early coordination, that was so instrumental in me, that it's funny how it evolves, but yet you sort of forget sometimes the people who influenced you.
Just on that too, Emma, the other paper that he wrote was a great story, The Making of Boris Becker, and it goes right through his development phase. And it's a great, again, it's an old paper, but to me, anything old is new. They sexy things up now and put a new name to it. What we were doing 20, 30 years ago. So,
totally agree.
It's a great paper.
Yeah. Well, both of those, we'll see if we can maybe put them on the resource section of this podcast, because I think a lot of coaches would be interested in both of those. Fantastic. So many awesome sliding door moments in 1 to a maximum of 3 words. What do you think makes a great coach?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. I think care factor, knowledge, and strong values and behaviour. I think they probably come into play. And the care factor around, if an athlete knows that you have their back, it's a two-way enthusiasm, you got clarity, there's compassion. The care factor is not for you just as a tennis player, but as a person. So the overall development, I think that is really important. The knowledge of the coach, the ability to upskill. The game's evolving all the time. You only got to look at the men's game at the minute, the return to serve position, what's happening there. So knowledge, the ability to upskill, and then strong values and behaviours. The role of the coach, I think, is critical. You are a role model, and simple things, clarity around what you're doing. Punctuality, honesty, trustworthy. Have the honest discussion. If need be. Because there's so many decisions. There's safe, political, moral decisions. But you've got to go with your gut. So if you have strong values and behaviours, I think you'll most times make the right decision. So, I guess the care factor, knowledge, and strong values and behaviour make a great coach. And then if you wanted a fourth one, what's happening now, obviously, with technology, data, and analytics, it's going to take over. There's no doubt about that. So being up to speed with that area.
Yeah. We had Johanna Conter was on a very recent episode on the coaching podcast, and she spoke a lot about values and her values aligning with the coach's values in terms of what makes a great coach. Fantastic qualities there, mate. Really appreciate that. And finally, our last official question is where we ask you to ask us a question.
When did you last back a winner?
That's classic.
I'll be serious. So I guess the thing would be around the trends of the game, and my mind has always ticked into the tactical component. You know, from a tactical point of view, what are the trends that we are seeing? So that would be one. And the second one, again, what I just mentioned before, what's the latest, you know, technology, data, analytics that you are using? Because there's so much out there that has been successful for you. You know, I know when the computers come out and all the charting and that, I found it very difficult on the iPad to start with too. And I'm still pen and paper. I find that, you know, but I know technology and data. So what works for you in that area with the technology? So they'd be the two trends and technology.
Yeah.
Of where does that sit going forward? You know, because like if this facial recognition comes into the sport, you know, that's going to change a lot around of how much information is out there for a coach, and then it will come down to how much information do you pass on to the athlete. You know, you can watch a match now and get reams of paper, 30 pages of information, but you're not going to pass on 30. So the coach has got to know what information do I want to pass on that's relevant to that particular player. Yeah.
Well, that was going to be my follow-up question. How much, when you would get the data, how much did you transfer? I know it's different from player to player, but generally speaking, would your game plan be A, B, C, or? Yeah. I always, again, big on simplicity. You know, match up your player's strengths first. Then look at your opponent's weakness, have plan A, plan B, and then if that's not working, let's go to plan C. And there's always that argument now with the modern game about power. You know, like they're trying to dominate the point so early. So if you're, you know, free flowing and being aggressive and missing all the time, do you continue down that path, or do you go back and just play solid tennis to get yourself back into the match? And that's always, you know, I talk to coaches a lot about that, and it's probably 50-50, the discussion. Personally, I would go back, and just play some solid tennis to get back, get some rhythm back. But again, going back, like I played doubles with a guy that had the best serve in the world back in the day, Colin Dibley, and he made me look good because his big serve. So all I was doing was finishing off work at the net. But he would have a period where he'd serve a number of double faults, and you'd say, well, let's just get, you know, some consistency and get your serve in. No, I'll hit my way through it. So as I said, to me, it's a 50-50 argument, that one. Yeah, but something that's of interest. Yeah. Yeah. So can we just take the clock back then to your playing career? ATP 73 in singles and 19 in doubles. Fantastic achievement. Do you think you maximised your potential, or do you think with a certain coach you could have pushed yourself even further, or what about on your own career?
No, look, when I look back, like obviously moving from Tamworth to Sydney, 15 turning 16, back then we were called PYJs, Promising Young Juniors. And that was a tag that stayed with us for a long time. But the improvement that I made was competition. Like I played 5 competitions in a week when I went to Sydney against some very, very good players. So that was super important. So within the space of, you know, losing a match to the top player when I was in Tamworth, 6-love, to beating that player 18 months later in the final of the New South Wales Championships, just tells you how important competition is. Yeah. Now I was lucky enough. I believe that I always wanted to get to top 50. That was my goal for where I've come from. You know, I got to 73. I would have loved to play Davis Cup, you know, even in doubles. But to give you an idea of how strong Australian tennis was back then, 73, I was ranked 13 in the country. So that gives you an idea, you know, of what you're up against. Yeah. But it was a great era to play in. The camaraderie, like there weren't a lot of coaches around. The camaraderie of the Australian players was fantastic. I know 73 was my first trip with Mark Edmondson. 76, he wins the Australian Open.
Wow.
So, Yeah. So, and as I said, friends in sport are lifelong, and all those friendships back then. It was a great era to play in. Yeah, and the Australians, as I said, the camaraderie was fantastic. I may have retired a little bit. I retired at 23, but that was 8 years. And I look back and people say, well, why didn't you, continue just to play doubles? Well, the money and everything back then, just playing doubles wasn't great. I was successful in doubles, but it wasn't great. But even in that last year of my playing, I mentioned about the tactical component. I always thought I had a calling to coaching. So as soon as the Australian Open finished, I went straight into coaching at Doncaster Tennis Club.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, straight off the tour to coaching. Yeah.
Why Melbourne?
My wife was from Melbourne, from a little country town called Birchip, and we ended up in Melbourne. There was nothing in Sydney at the time, trying to get lease on courts, and the different situation with leasing facilities in New South Wales to club tennis in Melbourne. So I was lucky enough to get the job at Doncaster and was there for 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and again, what a great experience that is. To me, that's the apprenticeship and the art of coaching before you go to the next stage, which for me was then 12 years at the AIS. So you learn a hell of a lot of coaching at club level. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it is important to sort of experience the gamut of coaching as well, isn't it? I mean, being on court with a complete beginner versus an elite player, it is a good apprenticeship, as you say.
Exactly. Yeah. The art of coaching. Yeah. Across many fields. Yeah.
So what about, I'm noticing here as well, I didn't know that you employed by the Chinese Tennis Association. Could you share a little bit, maybe even about what that was like as an experience, and also maybe some of the different philosophies potentially that you came across during your time there?
Yeah, it was a great experience. They identified 9 female athletes under Lee Na for the London Olympics, and I was given 2 of those players to work with. But I was only a travelling coach, so I was doing it in 6-week blocks. So the first 6-week block was a training camp in Guangzhou. In early December or late November, early through December, and it was, well, as I said, it was a great experience to see the work ethic of the athletes and the coaches was something special. One thing that really stood out, how important footwork was to them, and it was all about the 2 words that they used all the time were explosive and dynamic. So footwork had to be explosive and dynamic. I was asked to write up a 6-week plan for my 2 players for what I had to do, and I was always theme-based. So we'd work on a theme for a period of time, then move on and do another theme, etc., etc. So I did that over the 6-week period, handed it in. They did not use it at all. Again, it was all about just hitting tennis balls.
Yeah.
So volume. Don't care if we break down athletes. Volume. That was sort of the key. But as I said, it was a great experience. It didn't finish on a high. I don't know for sure, but I think, again, back to my values and behaviours, one of the things that I was big on was, you've done all your pre-work going into a tournament. During a tournament, we'll focus on matches. I will identify some things during the match that we will work on for maybe 10 or 15 minutes after the match for your next match. But they were big on, it wouldn't matter whether it was 7-5 in the third or 1-1, they would then go out and hit for 2 or 3 hours. So I stopped that with this particular player. And again, why I did it was here in Australia. It was a $25,000 tournament in Sydney. The player was unhappy that I was doing it. But to cut a long story short, she won the tournament. So, I thought, well, that's a pretty good effort. She goes back to China. I wait for my next 6 weeks. I get an email thanks very much, your time's finished.
Oh,
So yeah, I don't know whether that was the reason, but deep down, I think that maybe that was that they weren't happy that you know. So anyway, you move on. You put it down to experience. It was a great experience. Yeah. So I had about 18 months, 2 years doing that. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, it comes back to what you said earlier. Never be afraid to lose your job. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
Normally we lose our job if we don't get the results, but that's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. What about your time at Tennis Australia? I know even you and I took a team away together, the Tennis Victorian under-18 team away together. I'll never forget that.
Was it.
That
yeah,
week.
Linton and Wilson Cup at Traralgon, Emma.
Yeah, there you
what a
go.
great experience. Yeah.
What do you think about? I know that you've just retired. If am I allowed to say that word?
Yeah.
What are you most proud of? Like what during your time there, and just maybe share with the listeners your main role and responsibility, and besides mentoring young coaches, sponges like me.
The last 11 years, what a farewell, really, to 5 decades being in the one sport. So my role, it was a dual role. My title was development environment manager. So the development was the coaching side, and the environment was, I did all the research and development back in the it started in the 90s when I was at the AIS to bring clay courts into Australia. So I did a lot of work on that, because with the redevelopment, there were 8 clay courts going in at Melbourne Park. So that was the component there. So part of that, I went around Australia, looked at all the courts that we had, loam, ant bed, Onticar, etc., that were porous surfaces. But if we're going to put something in at Melbourne Park, we need something a little bit better than that. So again, the horizons broadened, and it ended up, we put a research centre in at Macquarie University in Sydney, and we put down trial courts of Italian clay, Hartrue, and the Conifer Pro Clay, which a couple of WTEA events are played on. So we could get clients, the governments, etc., to go and walk around and play on all 3 courts. So that gave them a great understanding. And then it was up to the hierarchy to choose which courts they wanted for Melbourne Park, and it was Italian clay, which is a great surface. Yeah. So I've been banging on that for years, that we need clay courts. So we've got half the equation right, but one of the things that I'm still, pushing is that we spend more time in Europe, and like playing Australians on clay is completely different to playing Europeans on clay. And if I can go back, in 2000, I did a feasibility study in Spain to put the AIS in Spain for 6 months. So I went to 6 different academies around Barcelona and Valencia, and came back and presented it just verbally, because I wanted to get a feel for it, to the Tennis Australia board. And it was along the lines that this is the ace in the pack, something of what we're looking for. But then further down the track, when it got down to nuts and bolts of it, I ended up leaving the AIS after 12 years, and it then went in the too hard basket. But I'm a great believer that should be something that has continued, the clay court development. The coaching side was with the high performance coaching course. So I was helping out with the workshops, site visits, assessments, etc. And then the Next Gen program came into play, which again was site visits and helping out with the workshops. And then I did a lot of mentoring, and it was a great team. You talk about, loving going to work. So my boss was Scotty Draper and Belinda Colineri. Like, you couldn't get 2 better human beings to work with, and we just bounced off each other, and it was fantastic. And the HP course, I believe, is one of the best. It's growing all the time. Belinda's got an incredible network of people that we can tap into outside of tennis, and that is always a highlight of when we do the workshops, etc. Yeah.
Well, as you said earlier, Bryce Courtney,
Yeah. Well, one of the guys we've used a lot is Harry Moffat, who's just written a book about 12, 18 months ago, 11 Bats. He was SAS. And we worry about hitting forehands and backhands. And when we talk about leadership and what they go through, the planning, etc., and you can just see the coaches when Harry talks, or Melbourne Storm. We get Frank Passini over from Melbourne Storm. Just the professionalism and everything that goes with that. So those things are critical for a coach outside of tennis to understand what's going on.
What would you say? I know, as you mentioned, 5 decades, but what would you go back and say to the younger coaching self of Chris? If you could give one message to your younger coach self, maybe how you might do something differently, or a philosophy shift over time, or is there anything around that?
I guess, and I was guilty of it in the early days, the spoken word of talking too much. I think that's one of the things. So to the younger coaches that are trying to don't overcoach. Teach your athletes that if you are not talking, they are doing a good job. Maybe a nod and a wink here and there, but so often, you'll see an hour session and it's actually probably broken down into maybe 15 minutes because of all the yap, 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 yap. So the spoken word, I think, is critical. Yeah.
I love that.
So yeah, very important. So don't overcoach. And as I said, the game's evolving. You've got to keep up skill. Your PD is critical to stay in touch with what's going on. So there's a hell of a lot of information out there. Take it all on board. Use what you can, and if you don't like the other stuff, we'll throw it out.
Yeah.
But I always say to the coaches, you can go and just roll along and play a straight bat all the time. But how about being innovative and creative and try something different? And that's what when I go on the site visits, I say to a coach, look, you're doing a good job. I'm just here as a different set of eyes to maybe give you some thought. Have you tried to do it a different way to get the same result? So, don't get robotic and keep doing it, because you can get stale as a bottle of, wine. So you've got to change it up, change it up. Don't be afraid to be innovative, creative, and do things differently if they're not working. Yeah.
Great message. What about your coach's eye? Was there someone who influenced your coach's eye, or how did you develop your coach's eye?
No, I think I just developed that myself. Again, as I said, through the observation and whatever. And again, I guess running into influential people and experiences, you pick up a lot of different things along the way. Like in another sliding doors moment was Djokovic years ago, when he was #1 in the world. He flew in from Doha into Melbourne. Now, this is a number of years ago, and they used to put the practice schedule up, and I saw that his first hit was on Margaret Court Arena. So this is going back a while because there's no roof. So I went out and had a look, and again, the warm-up was nothing special. He did some laps. He's very flexible. He did his TheraBand and whatever, but the professionalism with his kit and everything, drink bottle hat, sweatbands, he went straight to the baseline, and I counted at least 80 balls, no mistakes. He actually bunted the ball off at about 80 and got his coach to hit a new ball in. So that's something about, I see so many juniors now, they make a soft unforced error and there's no correction. The next one, same, soft. Sure, we make unforced errors, but the soft is the one that you've got to eliminate. So let's look at the lesson of Djokovic. His first hit, he's just flown in. He's hit 80 balls with no mistakes. So that tells you something about the mindset of the player. The other one, that my pet hate, if I can give you one pet hate, unless it's for touch and skill, etc., and you're working on a continental grip or whatever, is half-court warm-ups. I'm not big on that at all, because basically what happens, you do a warm-up, so you're building your intensity to a point, and then they go out and they just stand there and fluff around. So they, again, back to what I was saying, they actually regress. Why not go back to the baseline and work on your trajectories? All right, we'll start slow and then we'll get down lower. So we'll start, 50% and we'll work to 100% from the baseline. So again, that'd be something, as I said, in a site visit, I'd tell a coach, well, look what you've done here. Why don't you do something different in your warm-up? It's a bit of a sheep mentality. We'll follow that, but no, do something different.
Yeah, I love it. I'm sure many of our listeners will be having a think about how they do things differently after this episode, which is what the coaching podcast is all about. What about just going back to what you said earlier about, because we're on the mindset topic, this next generation, bunch of different personalities. Yes, we have a player-centered approach to learning, so we've got to adapt. But at what point do you change your philosophy? Because you've got someone who, they're a flamboyant or they're a creative personality, and so they do things differently, and they like to hit trick shots to warm up, or that's just as an example. But what's your advice on how do we tap into this next generation and motivate them when their mindset and potentially even their values are very different to what ours are?
Yeah, completely different. So just back to the mindset. Back in the day, the first book I read on mindset was The Inner Game, Timothy Galway, and I think everyone should read that. And that was a great read. Yeah, look, again, the continuum of coaching has changed. Like the mental aspect of it is coming into play more and more. So back to a player that has a lot of flair, I would not do anything I'd be more than happy to continue down that path. If they've got, because to me, that's a point of difference. And that's what you need in the modern game today. You need a point of difference. So if someone has a look at Kyrgios, it'd be very difficult to coach. But again, the flair that he's got, like if you tried to curtail that, it would go backwards very, very quickly. So you let it go. And another player that I had going back at the AAS was probably the best hitter of the ball that I've ever had. And I'll say who it was, Andrew Illy.
Yeah.
Andrew could hit the ball. Stroke production was as good as anyone. You could put together a video, the best 5 minutes and the worst 5 minutes within a match. That's how it would be. And again, he was in his last year of juniors, I think it was, and he took Agassi, I think it was, at the Australian Open 7-5 in the fifth. He was that talented. So, but one thing there, what I did try there was that, again, we need to have, the plan, what we talked about, B and C. If it's not working, we need to get some patterns of play to get you back into it. And that was the most difficult that I've ever tried. So in the end, it was reverse psychology. Well, Buggy, hit it down the line then. Don't worry about the pattern. So where do you reckon he went? Cross court. So yeah. So you got to laugh. Yeah. So but yeah. So there. But again, anyone with flair, I'd leave it. And again, add to it what you can.
Yeah. Well, so many great messages, and I think, like you said, add to the flair. But at the end of the day, it comes back to the very start of this interview about work ethic, commitment, and training's like war. Even though they've got the flair, it's like what you bring. You can still have that high value, that care factor, that knowledge. So many great moments. We could go on. Thank you so much for being on the coaching podcast. Any last words of wisdom that you want to leave us with?
There was one saying, which again, for all coaches, and this was from CNN, and I don't know how long ago it was, and it was along the lines of, coaching is the universal language of change and learning. And I think that's very important. So universal language of change and learning. And my favourite saying to that is, the day we stop learning is the day we run second.
Absolutely. And that also just anyone out there is a little bit of a horse reference. I always bump into Chris Kachel at the horse races in Melbourne. I miss them dearly. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing just a snapshot, tiny snapshot of your wisdom over 50 years in the sport. We're so lucky to have you on the Coaching Podcast and in the industry. So thank you so much.
Pleasure, Emma. Good to see you.
The Coaching Podcast is sponsored by Transition Coach for Athletes, a global coaching, mentoring and US college sporting scholarship placement service. Visit www.transitioncoachforathletes.com. That's the number 4. The Coaching Podcast is brought to you by your energy and high performance under pressure coach, Emma Doyle. www.emmadoyle.com.au or email her info@emmadoyle.com.au. The ball is in your court to take action and enjoy your coaching.